Thank you very much indeed, Clara, for the video. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to this webinar today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you for joining us. And as Janet is preparing to share her screen, I would like to introduce her now to you and also introduce the topic, which is one of the most important topics we have today, which is frameworks for justice. And the speaker is Professor Janet Gerson. Dr. Janet Gerson is a political theorist, writer, artist, and activist educator. She has taught peace education, conflict processes, transformative learning, and futures envisioning. She is education director of the International Institute on Peace Education and co-director of the former Peace Education Center, Teachers College, Columbia University, New York City. She has also published widely. Now, I would like to ask Janet to start sharing her screen. A very warm welcome to you, Janet. Thank you for joining us. And I understand that this is not the first time you are joining our webinar, but it is the first time you are talking to us formally. So welcome, Janet Gerson.
Hello, this is a great honor to be here and to share my topic with you. I'm very grateful to George, to Lester, to Egon, and to our friend at University of Nanjing for sponsoring these global webinars, and our friends in Argentina for also bringing it forward. And I'm just delighted to share my topic with you. And I'm a little bit, I think someone else had this problem too. You work so hard to the last minute and your computer crashes, and then you have the PowerPoint over there. And so I have, what I have is a written version of my PowerPoint. And then I have a one that I did and saved on this computer. So let me share screen with you, and let me warn you that this PowerPoint here, let's see, let's go to, well, this PowerPoint is the old one. And so what I'm going to do is show you, use the slides because I think they help clarify a bit, but also say that I will not do exactly what the PowerPoint is showing you. I'll explain as I go, so please bear with me. So when I first made this PowerPoint, I was focusing on reclaimative and transitional justice because I've written a book with Dale Snowart on reclaimative justice, and because also I see that transitional justice has been a very important concept in Africa. Now many of you are experts in Africa, which I am not. And I may use some examples from the United States where I'm more experienced, or from other countries where I've worked. Okay, let me explain the title, The Theater of Peacemaking. More specifically, I work on the idea of justice, conceptualizing justice. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a political theorist and a peace educator, but I have in my background the very exciting, dynamic efforts of global peace networks for justice in the UN NGO community, particularly in the women's violence against women and human rights, and as well as being colleagues with the women who supported the development of the Rome statutes for the International Criminal Court. And so I've been part of this, what I call the jurogenesis of law in the, what some people will call the Wild West of international law, meaning there's no enforcement. And as we know, governments or various powers make their own rules about what they can do. Okay, for that reason, among others, I want to speak about justice, peace, and law and how they're related. Another rationale for the importance of this discussion is that there's been a great backlash because of the perception and the reality of domination in using international law and through the Security Council of the UN as a kind of elitist Northern Western setup after World War II for the Allies to dominate world everything, world power, world economy, world concepts of justice. And this backlash also, I feel, goes against the idea that of human rights and international law, because these are seen as dominating from the West and the North, and which I, as you can see, am unfortunately a part of, or fortunately. But I think there's some value still, and I recognize the great movements and research on colonization and decolonization. And you'll bring that forward as we get then. And finally, what really makes the backlash have resonance is the failures of international peacemaking. And we can all be so sad. Those of us working on peace and women's rights are just so sad about the conflicts that are going on now. And I'll just go on from here. Finally, a last part of my rationale is that peace learning is learning how to think and view different perspectives. So in order to explain that, first of all, I'm going to ask you to think for yourself, what is your idea of justice? Where does that come from? Does it come from your government? Does it come from your religion? Does it come from tradition of your community? And is it vengeance? Is it accountability? Is it something you feel, or is it something where you refer to outside institutions? Ask yourself these things as you're listening to what I'm saying, and then in the discussion, you can bring more to bear. Each of our perspectives is important. Okay, so that's the rationale in my background. Now, as I said, for those of you who came in, my computer crashed. And so this PowerPoint is not exactly, I'm going to read from my more recent one, but let me say, I see that I work on a relational paradigm for peace, justice, and democratic ethic of participation. So this is a pragmatic definition of peace, where peace is legitimated through public agreement based on shared normatives, that is social and social political principles. And here's a quote from my mentor, Dr. Betty Reardon. Peace is possible when societies agree that the overarching purpose of public policies is the achievement and maintenance of mutually beneficial circumstances that enhance the life possibilities for all, sometimes identified as universal respect for human rights. So if we think that peace, think whether you agree with this or not, it's a very general definition. And here is another very general definition of justice, which I've put together, a set of interrelated. Justice can be described as a set of interrelated and dynamic processes based on a core of value concepts, that is norms and also laws, which are implemented and sustained through various institutions, procedures, and structural mechanisms to promote fairness, settle conflicts, and hold violators accountable. So now on here is another definition from Julia Upinar, who I know through the World Tribunal on Iraq, a global civil society tribunal in which much of my research has been based. She says that she's a human rights lawyer, and she says, law is a dynamic social political means for enacting justice, and that is far from complete. So you see, this is kind of my worldview that I'm coming from. And let's think that you will think of yours. Here are some definitions of justice. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give some descriptions of justice. Then I'm going to describe 4 types of post-conflict justice, where, post-conflict in the sense that everything's fallen apart and something new has to be reinstituted, reorganized, reformulated. So I'll get to that after we just review some of these concepts of justice. Well, first of all, here's one that, let's just go back to this. Here's one that's not here. I see justice as an infrastructure for peace. Here's a quote from Hilal Kuye, another Turkish lawyer from the World Tribunal on Iraq. If world peace is to be constituted, and this is an absolute necessity for our world to continue to exist, then we need to develop the bases for a different approach to justice, judgment, and institutions. The war against Iraq in 2003, she's speaking about, which has violated the collective conscience of peoples of the world, as well as the international documents, is violating the law. In violating the law, did not only breach some signed and stamped documents, but also violated people's hopes and beliefs in the future. And this, in fact, is the real atrocious crime and traumatic violation. So she's bringing together the idea of justice and the idea of law, judgment, and institutions that includes not just law and institutions or signed documents and treaties, but also the fact that we need stability and peace to have hopes and beliefs in the future. And this hope and belief in the future comes with stability of knowing what's next, what we can count on. And of course, we know from the lockdown and sudden ending of so many things and blocking of so many activities and communications during COVID that one of the things that happened is that we couldn't plan anything. We didn't know what would come next. So it gives us a little taste of what she's describing. So that's a Turkish human rights lawyer. Now the next quote come from other lawyers of the global South. Jayan Nayar, Balakrishnan Rajagopal, and Boaventura de Sousa Santos. And I'm quoting from our book on reclamative post-conflict justice, which I'll explain later, which is co-authored with Dale Snowert. If the world, cosmopolitan subaltern legality and international law from below consist of activist law doing and acted through authoring accounts and interpretation of law with meanings given by communities of suffering, or put differently, to demand that the law takes suffering seriously. So law is not just for the elite or to power over, but to bring forward to bring into view the violations of humans and how some people suffer in the way institutions are arranged. And furthermore, to bring these voices into understanding, writing, and authoring and enacting law that could incorporate justice for all, especially those who now are suffering under the systems we have. Okay, now just for your own perspective, to broaden this idea of justice a little farther, here's from Dale Snowert from the Kantian political theory tradition. Here is a very basic definition of justice, which is relational. And therefore it's a moral definition, because here it is. Justice is what each person is due and what we owe each other. It's a fundamental expression of interconnectedness, our interdependence, and how we need each other, and what we do to and with and for each other constitutes the moral foundation of a society. The second, so Dale's is put in a positive way. Here's from a negative version. Thomas Scanlon says, justice based on dignity and inclusion is what no one could reasonably deny others. Let that sink in. When we evaluate justice, or acts of justice, or claims of justice, we have to think, is this something that no one could reasonably deny others? Is this based on dignity and inclusion? Then we move to John Rawls, who's really reopened political theory, the field of political theory. And he says, justice is fairness that fosters cooperation. So these are all aligned, and now Rawls is speaking not so much on the individual or the social level, but he really tries to think, what would institutions be like in the society? And then we move to David Miller, who says, justice requires an agent whose political and action will alters the circumstances of objects and issues. The agent may be an individual, a group, or an institution, such as a state, or we might say international organizations in the international community. I hope you can't hear these trucks that are going by my neighborhood. So let's see. Wow. So I would say, okay, here's one we can use. The pictures aren't coming up. That's so sad. They're beautiful. Okay. I would say, so the pictures that you can't see are, one is of the International Court of Justice, which doesn't actually try cases, but gives advice in The Hague. And it's a picture with a grand building with big windows and chandeliers and seats nailed to the floor with a podium that's raised. So the tribunal in this case shows this understanding from the original word, tribune or tribunal, that it's the seat of authority. But in global civil society, we've been working towards a more horizontal, inclusive, and comprehensive by everyone, not just the experts or the people who are high up on the podium to make a decision. And that's a horizontal organizing. And in the World Tribunal in Iraq was a little bit, you could see a kind of casual picture where people are sitting in set up chairs, and the walls are brick and bare. And ironically, it's the former mint of the Ottoman Empire on the grounds of Topkapi Palace, which they got to use for this global citizens tribunal on the war in Iraq, because at that time, Turkey was trying to get into the European Union. So they were trying to demonstrate how they were pro-human rights. Okay, so these kinds of activities can happen on all levels, tribunals. And why am I talking about tribunals? Because in the end of conflict, so much has been destroyed and so much needs to be rebuilt. And so how do these deliberations take place? If there are deliberations, or how do they get organized? I see that tribunals serve as public spaces that require public deliberation. That might be a bit ideal, but that's my, so I'm going to review 4 types. Now this slide, unfortunately, you can see before my editing, highlights 4 kinds of tribunals, post-conflict tribunals. The first is Retributive Justice Tribunal. And the prototype is Nuremberg, which was also called, which was international. It was a military victors tribunal, and it's called victors' justice because only the Germans were tried and not the damage brought about by the Allies was not part of the tribunal. So only the losers of the war were tried. And in retributive justice, the powers or the authority is with the state or the dominant power. And this is true in criminal justice, which is what we're talking about, where retribution means punishment. Accountability means punishment, a judgment of guilt or innocence. So it's kind of a win-lose situation in retributive justice. And this is the kind of justice we have, at least in the United States, more or less, speaking stereotypically, in the criminal justice system of the United States. If someone commits a robbery or robs a bank or something, then they're put on trial, and these are standing ongoing courts. Unlike the tribunals, which are, tribunals fill in a gap that for which there are no official institutions or authorities. So if a government has fallen and lost accountability, or a society is completely disorganized, there's no justice system left to, or in the case of war, when everything was destroyed, there was only this example. Okay, now, restorative justice tribunals. In looking at Nuremberg and the hierarchical top-down guilt or innocence, other places have tried to restore community over the idea of who's right and who's wrong, who wins and who loses. And so restoring community is where I think the basis of restorative justice comes from. The prototype is the South African Truth and Reconciliation Tribunal. And that was a national tribunal. And I'm going to go over these one more time, I think, to say, well, I'll put one through this framework I've given. The point is that after the ANC won the election and a democratic government replaced the apartheid government, it was made known that the people who had run the apartheid government would not stop the violence if they were put on trial. So it was negotiated to, and this is a very simplified version, to institute amnesty for offering truth-telling. People wanted to know, what happened to my family members? What did you do? And so for those who offered truth and history and documentation, it was seen that all the people, both the perpetrators and the victims, and of course, many people had some overlap in this, were both perpetrators and victims, had organized a way through this Truth and Reconciliation Commission to try to bring the country and the society back together. So the aims were to stop the killing and the violence, and also to restore the society, and importantly, to restore legitimacy to governance and a functioning society. Now, Reclaimative Democratizing Justice Tribunal is based on this work of the World Tribunal on Iraq, which took place from 2003 to 2005. People all over the world protested the idea of the United States and the UK invading, attacking Iraq, and then acting as a provisional coalition authority, the occupying authority, the people who had attacked Iraq. So people from all over the world organized a tribunal to document the causes of the war and the actors who supported the war and the truth. This truth included 20 hearings on multiple subjects were organized, 3 meetings, then 20 hearings around the world were organized, and then a culminating session took place in Istanbul in June 2005. And people from various countries addressed the multiple topics of a war. For example, media, what corporations from each country were benefiting from the war? What was the cultural destruction, the historical destruction? What were the lies and what laws were broken in international law? Could this case be tried in the International Criminal Court? So people got together who were, on the one hand, they were anarchists who didn't believe government or law could ever work. And strikingly, incredibly, they collaborated with international lawyers and jurist experts who argued for the value of making a case and accumulating documentation for the International Criminal Court, and which had just opened right before the attack on Iraq. So they were interested in furthering the development of international law, making a case for the new International Criminal Court so that would be used for issues of justice for not just domination, but for the voices of people and suffering around the world, and putting the law to use. So, which is also a way to develop the law. Okay, and the fourth example is transitional justice. Now, transitional justice isn't really one model or example, but it's a movement that was really started by, on the one hand, the word was coined by Ruthie Tiedel, who's an international lawyer, a law expert, who is from Argentina. And actually the first restorative justice tribunal took place in Argentina after the fall of the military dictatorship there. And then the concept was developed further by Patricia Hayner. And now there's you can see here, if you can see it, the International Center for Transitional Justice organization is now a center. So it's all been kind of corporatized as an international organization where they come in and do what help and bring people in, experts of different kinds, to help with comprehensive formulation in a country after conflict and violence that is victim-centered and can include criminal justice, reparations, truth and memory, institutional reform, gender justice, youth engagement, sustainable development goals, prevention, and peace processes. So that's a lot. Let's see. So reclaimative justice is a newer concept, and transitional justice is an unfolding concept. So, oh, the pictures aren't showing, it's so sad. Okay, as I said before, my computer crashed last night. So let's just go. I just want to say that the international, so the idea of justice and global or international justice has been developing. There was a permanent court of international justice that after World War I was formed and lasted from 1922 to 1946. Then with World War II, and then with the formation of the UN, a new court was formed, and this is the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which still exists, the one I was describing with the chandeliers and the glorious windows. But they only give legal advice, advisory opinions. They don't have trials. Countries can come there for a kind of dispute resolution. So that is still ongoing. Now, after World War II, there was not only Nuremberg, but the Tokyo military tribunals, which took place in 1946 on the crimes of the Far East. Again, victor's justice, not victim's justice. Or it was about states versus states and winners and losers. And these are about both this and actually the formation of the UN had to do with the rearrangement of power relations. Okay, so since then though, I think there's some value in that, and you can say, especially if you have experience and you're from Africa, with UN instituted what they call ad hoc courts, meaning they're tribunals that, meaning they're tribunals that are organized for a particular occasion or a particular set of crimes. Sometimes the courts have been not only UN organized, but include local or national, both leaders in running and formulating the tribunal, but also traditional means of conflict resolution, including what to do with the children who become child soldiers and how they might be reincorporated into the society. So, okay. I just want to point out that the International Criminal Court, that the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction, so here's the important concept of scope. Each court has a limited jurisdiction. The law applies only to certain kinds of crimes and certain kinds of arenas or areas that they might take place. So the International Criminal Court only deals with the 4 most heinous violations against humanity as it's described. And these were formulated in the Nuremberg Tribunal. So that's how the law is being brought forward. And so, I don't know, was anyone here alive during Nuremberg? I was born shortly after, so we can see, those of us who are older can feel the length of time. The International Criminal Court was formed in, the Rome Statutes were formulated in 1998, the description of what the court would be and its mission. And the court came into open for business, as they said, in 2002. So that was, more than 50 years since the Nuremberg Tribunal. Okay, these crimes are crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, and the crime of aggression. That was the hardest for states to agree upon because, of course, aggression is one of their techniques for extending power, etc. But I want to point out that the crimes against humanity became very important in the Restorative Justice Tribunal of the exemplified in South Africa. If you read, as I did, the documents and the formulation, the conceptualization of the court really focused on this idea of humanity and restoring humanity and organizing that in their new interim constitution. And of course, the word Ubuntu became, through the court, our, this is so sad. Okay, here's two pictures that aren't here, that are in my computer that crashed, two from South Africa, one with a formal setting, but still not as, more casual than the courts in The Hague, and the other of Native Americans or indigenous people from Canada who are having tribunals. Okay, this is sad. Okay. They, as part of, it was colonization and actually a genocide of Native Americans and their culture. Children of indigenous tribes or First Peoples tribes were taken and put in Christian run boarding schools. So they were removed from their families, removed from their tribal grounds, and and many of them died. Their parents never found them again. And many of them have severe damage because they were taken over by these, put in a system with a lack of care. Okay, the last one I'm really going to go into is Reclaimative Post-Justice Tribunal, which is the World Tribunal on Iraq. And the World Tribunal on Iraq has a precedent from the Russell Tribunal, which was Bertrand Russell formulated a tribunal against the war in Vietnam and the US involvement and aggression in Vietnam. But Bertrand Russell, this leading philosopher and great man, said what the outcome would be. The precedent is that people's tribunals can organize against what governments are doing and try to call governments into account. The precedent that the World Tribunal on Iraq rejected was the age of heroes and great men who dictate what the outcome will be. And so people from all over the world were coordinated through a group of women in Istanbul, and brought together this tribunal, which on the one hand, the important points are generated a public space to expose and deliberate on problems of global justice, to fill in the gap between human rights norms and the actions in the world, in the global setting, and between the idea of justice and how law is functioning. They also generated this public space. They demanded justice and accountability, and they aimed to provoke official authorities to redress the deadly gap between what corporations are doing and what must be instituted for protection of women, workers, dignity, safety, security, well-being, the core human components of justice. And here I will stop. So, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Janet. This is a wonderful presentation, and I would like to ask participants for questions, comments, observations. And so you may raise your hand or just click on that golden hand. Or you put your question or comment in chat. That would be also excellent.
I think I'm going to change to I'm going to try to change to this other computer.
All right.
See if that works. Ah, hello.
Wonderful. Now full screen. Great. Yeah, perfect. So, questions or comments?
My memory is polluted. Here's a comment in the chat. I was alive, but my memory is polluted by Hollywood movies about the Nuremberg trials.
Oh, I can see Ian Fright, please, from Australia. Thank you for joining us. You have a comment or question?
Both, George, and thank you for your welcome. It's really a pleasure to be with you. Janet, that was a remarkable coverage of so many different attitudes towards justice. I couldn't keep up with some of them, but the one thing which did strike me, and I find myself taking exception to it, was the remark attributed to Rawls, that justice is whatever will give rise to cooperation. I think that is a very retrograde approach to justice and reconciliation. It cannot work because it's a case of taking someone from the lowest common denominator just up a little bit until they will agree to whatever the greater of the two powers decides is going to be acceptable. And it cannot work because there is always a residue of distrust, irritation at what could be the loss of of a proper right or privilege in resolution of a conflict. And so I wasn't very impressed by that comment from Rawls, and I think it justified an intervention. Some of the others were very interesting. I thought that you might have gone on to treat with the International Court of Justice as well as the International Criminal Court. I'd be interested to hear if you have got any observations on the usefulness or effectiveness of the International Court of Justice. So thank you, George. I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
It's a
May
pleasure.
I respond?
Yes, please.
Thank you so
Go
much
ahead.
for being here. I'm honored to have you, Ian, and I'm very happy with your comments. Thank you. The trouble with making half sentences to represent someone's work is completely unfair. And if you study Rawls, so the first part of the comment is justice as fairness. And he was thinking of institutions establishing standards of fairness and doing it through the rational and the reasonable communicative efforts towards reaching understanding. And if not one homogeneous understanding, I love this phrase, towards a congruence of opinion. Like we may not all agree, but if we come to an understanding and a respect for the different positions of the people who are, and he's really talking about governments, you know, or agencies, or if we come to an understanding that can respect and somehow incorporate these views, recognize these views, that would be a fairness. So it's not like the total common denominator. And that's a very good point about our social justice, you know, include everyone thinking. Thank you. And let me say that tribunals, all of these tribunals shouldn't be judged on outcome. And this, in my next talk, I will talk about the limits of assessment, effectiveness, and problem solving, because many of the things we're facing now, take the war in Ukraine, take the global pandemic, take the global climate catastrophe. We can't, no one group, no place is going to solve these problems. We have to be working for many, you know, like biting away at the corners in the middle from many different perspectives and many different kinds of thinking. And that's really what I want you to walk away from here with. The idea that we have to try to learn from each thinking and each effort. All of these are efforts at justice that I described. None of them would give the kind of full justice that we really want, sadly. But, you know, we fallible humans are trying. So thank you for your great questions.
Thank you. And there is honestly just Joe, and then we go to Frank. Broadhead, please. Joseph, you start, please.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for the lovely presentation, Janet. I think on the backdrop of what you just said, I just wanted, I think the justice should become more dynamic than static. Because I did a short course on law, and there was the principle of precedence. I mean, it's good, it has its merits, right? But
Joseph, sorry,
we should
breaking. Sorry, Joseph, if you could stay close to your microphone and don't move so much. Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, so the principle of precedence, right? It has its merits, but we should agree that many times we keep seeing it as history is developing, you know, and changing, and times are changing, that a solution today might not be relevant tomorrow. You know what I mean? And this keeps being proven in every age over time. So I feel like justice should also catch up to that reality of life, and also be more dynamic and more accepting to change, you know? Yeah, because like the reasoning of today can be better than yesterday, but tomorrow a new idea might come that will actually more. I feel like where we're headed is towards that unifying theory. Every conversation leads us closer and closer and closer to that. So the justice systems should stop being rigid and also really just start realizing that all of life is headed towards one thing, if we really pay attention.
May I ask you, Joseph, I'm glad you're here, and I remember you from your presentation. And
Thank you.
I'm wondering if this comment you had was your thinking before coming today, or if there was anything in my presentation that you saw that supports your thinking.
It was actually I think it was Ian's comment, but also it has been my thinking too, because I've just been seeing how so many aspects of life are still rigid and are not flexible enough to bend to the changes that we deal with every day. You know, so even on justice, I have thought about it before, but also just the conversation gave me, I guess what I said was from listening to what has been talked about also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And can we go to Frank, please?
Thank you, Dr. Gerson. That was very informative. I was wondering if you could distinguish or clarify differences and similarities between transitional justice and restorative justice. This has been passing through my mind during the last week or two with the transition going on in Colombia now.
Colombia, okay. Thank you. Excellent question. Should I out you, or Frank has been working with me for like
you just answered
15, 20 years, yeah. and so it's not just that he heard the talk very well, but okay, Frank, I would say that all the three forms of retributive, restorative, and reclamative justice all can be part of transitional justice. So you notice with transitional, I didn't say a transitional justice tribunal, because the tribunals all are more focused in scope and jurisdiction. So transitional justice, you can apply that, and you can see by the list that I read of all the things they do. You know, they have a great, it's like the supermarket of moving forward for justice. Now, let's talk about Colombia. And by the way, I want to tell you about my book before we close, George. Please help me remember, I can offer a discount for it also.
Perfect.
In Colombia, just on Monday, they released the report of the tribunal that was held in Colombia. So the International Criminal Court, this is a very new development, Joe Justice, that the International Criminal Court will not take cases unless the country itself who's bringing the case forward will not hold their own tribunal. And so Colombia, being afraid, from our colleagues like Amada Benavides, described how there was a threat at the previous election when the older government was elected out and the newer government was elected in. This was one election cycle ago, that the International Court was looming over Colombian government and telling them that if they didn't have their own tribunal, the International Criminal Court people would be bringing cases there. And so Colombia scrambled and, organized to have their own tribunal. And I haven't been able to look at the results, but they were just released this past Monday. So those countries that are party to the tribunals, to the International Criminal Court, they've signed the Treaty of the Rome Statutes, then they are in that position. For example, with the war in Iraq, the United States did not sign, well, it signed and then reneged its signature of the treaty, the Rome Statutes for the International Criminal Court, but the United Kingdom did sign it. And therefore they had their own tribunal in order to avoid being, having their leaders like Tony Blair arrested and brought to the International Criminal Court. They had their own tribunal. So I know it's kind of complicated to talk about law, and I'm wondering if you learned anything. And I'm wondering, Frank, if I answered your question. Hello, Gina. Did I answer your question?
A little bit. I think that for Americans, the headline in the Colombian investigation or tribunal is the role of the United States in manipulating and supporting the fascist politics of the various Colombian governments. While this doesn't have restorative potential in the sense that no one is being published or told to stand in the corner and so on, I think it's very revealing. And if transitional justice in all countries undergoing a government transition of major proportions were to have such an investigation, I think it would be very helpful in clarifying the world situation.
Yes, well, if someone were punished, that would be retributive justice, not restorative justice. The fact that they're airing those things is possible. And of course, in Colombia, the situation is much greater than just the United States, because actually in the previous election, it was between the people who supported the traditional organization of landowners who were in charge, in control, in power, people with ficas, the coffee plantations, versus the person who was elected was opening up the land to extraction. So instead of fighting over the marijuana and drugs, the issue became how can we get at this rich land where all this mountainous, unsettled, unmined special materials. And that included Canada and many other transnational corporations. So it's all too complex really for any one mind, but we get the picture, I think. Yes, thank you. Gina. Oh, sorry, George, that's your job.
Yeah, well, thank you. And there are questions in chat. Would you like to, for example, one from Florence, and there's another one from Donna. Can I read that one out for you, or you please do it if you
Yes, can. Yes. Your presentation, Janet, do you think that social justice situation in the world has improved by the institution of the International Criminal Court? Well, actually, I think it's really important to look at all the different levels that things are operating on. I don't think the International Criminal Court works on the social political level. They're working to develop international law and a system of accountability for states. And I think the World Tribunal, in its modeling of what global civil society can do to cooperate, is a much better example. And then, of course, the World Tribunal on Iraq, People's Tribunals, bring together so many local groups who are working on social justice issues as they play out in their locale. And I think that's a better, I don't know, that's like going to the supermarket for a new mattress for your bed. It's like it doesn't fit, so thank you. But it's a good question. Donna Pino, who went to Teachers College. I look forward to talking to you about that more. Some judges in the US have been murdered. In the US? Did you mean in the United States?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Some judges in the US have been murdered by
People.
thank you, people who didn't like the judges met it out. Can you comment? Oh, I sympathize. I'm not good at typing either. So,
do you remember a couple of weeks ago, a judge was plastic tied to a chair and murdered in his home by a man who he had given a sentence earlier. The man served his sentence, came out, and decided to murder that judge. In the late 70s, there was a guy running a chemical. He was making heroin at NYU in his lab, and he was sent to prison. And when he came out of prison, he made up a box of chocolate candies that were laced with poison and had them delivered to the home of the judge, whose wife ate one and died. Do you remember any of that?
Somewhat, yes.
And this just happened 10 days ago.
Well, I think I didn't really speak too much on the person-to-person level. I could have talked all about the situation on my block right downstairs from me and the crimes that are happening and threatening and all that. But really what I'm trying to encourage you to think on the more overarching levels of how justice is tried is, I didn't talk on the police level, the street level. You know, people, you know, one obstacle to justice is, justice involves cooperation, working together, communicating. And one obstacle to that is the fact that we can be murdered. I hate to be blunt, but you know, that's been an approach used. People, there are genocides for that reason. You know, we don't have to deal with these people. And there are crimes, there are plenty of people who are really, you know, out of control. So that's a more on a police and a local retributive justice level. Or perhaps Mike is here and she could speak on how it might be alternatives to prison might deal with that. But anyway, yes, so she'll be speaking in a few weeks, few months, I guess. Okay, what else? From Madam Krusco. Dear Dr. Gerson, I have heard you enlighteningly compare the January 5th hearings to a tribunal, January 6th, right? Do you think appeal to our sense of legality and lawfulness, or to our sense of morality and outrage? Well, that's a great question. Thank you, Gina. I think, you know, she's referring to the fact that there was an insurrection at the past moment where the election had happened and there was supposed to be, as has happened for 200 years, a peaceful transition from the Trump administration government to the new administration with Joe Biden as the president. And instead, there was an insurrection and an attack on the Capitol inspired by, apparently, the documentation is coming out on how the President Trump at that time did not want to leave office and was instigating not the army, not the courts of law, but a mob riot to stop the turnover of the government. And so, okay, this is a good point. We're having congressional hearings. Congressional hearings don't decide. They're like a tribunal, like the World Tribunal on Iraq. They don't have enforcement power, but they can make recommendations to the judicial system, and the judicial system are organizing criminal court proceedings against Donald Trump, not only on the federal level, we'll see if they actually go to court on the federal level, the cases are brought, but cases have been brought in the state of Georgia, in the state of New York for various kinds of corruption, election corruption, corporate money corruption, and in the federal Southern District of New York, cases are being brought against Donald Trump in retributive justice. So at the same time, as Jamie Ruskin said, one of the senators on the committee, he said his main concern is not bringing Donald Trump to trial. His main concern is preserving our democratic tradition, improving it, protecting it. And you see, what court deals with that? We need moral outrage. We need to understand how the law in its limited ability can be used, or its limited jurisdiction can be used. And then we as citizens and subjects and bystanders across the world need to deal with this problem, because, you know, democracy has to be brought to life, and we're only just, you know, hopping around like toddlers here, you know, little better than toddlers. I'd say we're like adolescents at this point. So did that answer your question? Thank you. What about Putin? Well, you see how international global justice can't do anything with Putin. Like, while the conflict is going on, the main issue is to stop the violence, stop the killing, stop the aggression, stop the bombing, because look at how much damage to human society, human infrastructure, material infrastructure, food chains around the world are totally damaged. Plus our faith in, as I said before, our faith in humanity, our faith in a future, our faith to make plans is destroyed. So that's the first level that must be dealt with. And okay. Nike, did you have a question or comment? See, we use, Donna, we use these words justice and justification and injustice. We all use.
There is a question. Could you go first?
What?
Joseph has raised his hand.
Okay. Well, let me just say, we all use those words. Oh, wait, they have also very clear definitions and scopes, limits, and focus. And we need to focus and say what we mean. Okay, thank you. Joseph.
Okay, yes. So I have a question, right? Is there a proactive approach to justice? Like, I'm thinking. Okay, no, respond.
Well, I thought maybe someone who heard the presentation, something in the presentation might come forward and say something about that, given there were several examples. Did anyone pick up something from the presentation? I'm a peace educator, you see, so I bring the question back to all of us. Did anyone hear something in the presentation that was a proactive approach to justice?
Because I might have missed it, but I was listening for something, or I think I had an idea of something that maybe didn't come, or maybe it came in a way that I wasn't anticipating and I didn't notice.
Yes, you know, you might not recognize my words. I'm talking like this person studied all these things and not, you know, like whatever you know and you've studied haven't spoken enough to reach this congruence of understanding that Rawls was talking about.
I get you, because an idea that came to mind, as I was thinking about it, I thought I like the concept of protesting in America. I like the idea of it. Maybe the execution doesn't really, it seems like it doesn't do much, but I like the idea of it. Because I was thinking, instead of protests, right, maybe there can be an active body that's actively looking at the current laws and how they are working every day, like over time, you know, constantly, like actually collecting data and not waiting for an incident, for a conflict to happen, for us to review, to try and apply the laws we know, to try to anticipate. Yeah, to try to anticipate, a way to try to anticipate and actually improve the laws, like with technology, we're constantly, improving computers and improving them, reviewing how fast they can be, and all that. We can just think the same way with laws and stuff, That's what I was thinking.
Okay, well, let me repeat this. As I said before, my computer crashed last night with my more clear version of my presentation, where you could end with the pictures. But let me just say that in 2002, August, the International Criminal Court opened for cases. And lawyers all over the world were working to develop cases to present to the International Criminal Court that would be chosen and decided. So that's August. In September, the United States and the UK announced that they were planning to attack Iraq. So people all over the world were organizing. They were mainly organizing against the G9, against the World Trade Organization and the financial organizations. But they had global organizations in place, like train tracks, that they agreed, especially they agreed to put aside primarily anti-globalization and focus on anti-war. And so protests were taking place from the fall of 2002 to this massive global, the largest anti-war ever took place on the weekend of September 15th. But it was the weekend because all over the world, protests were happening according to when it was daylight. From Antarctica to New York to Mexico to et cetera, Europe and Asia. Okay, then the United States a month later attacked, United States, UK attacked Iraq. And then the UN in May, so March, April, then May, the UN assigned the United States and the UK as in charge of the occupation. The attackers became in charge of the occupation. And our beloved president at the time, George W. Bush, got on a ship and that with a big sign behind him, mission accomplished. Armed conflict is over. And people around the world who had protested were completely outraged. And they met on May 20th in Jakarta to formulate projects to fight the war. And one of those projects was the World Tribunal on Iraq. So this is May 2003. And the war kept going. And people said, you know what? Post-conflict, we're not waiting. George Bush himself said the armed conflict is over. Let's start a post-conflict tribunal now. And the information is unfolding, and we have people all over the world to document how our countries are participating, how the corporations based in our countries are profiting, and let's document all this and move this forward. We are subjects to the law. We don't have to be citizens of a country. We are global citizens, and this is a bigger than states and countries. And they held a tribunal. So that's, you know, pretty cool.
Excellent.
Thank
you so much, Janet. And yes. Michael had raised his hand. Probably he will. If you hear us, Michael Britton, please.
Oh, should I speak now?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say about proactive justice. Reminded me in the United States, the National Department of Justice has a very small division called community relations. So when tensions and hatreds are rising in a community, they can contact this agency and they will send people in to not to make arrests, but to calm things down so no violence happens and arrests aren't needed. And their job is just to engage in making peace among the groups. So I was reminded of that by your question about proactive justice, which I liked the question very much.
Thank you so much for the comment, Michael. And Afiz Sofiano.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ma, for your presentation. Based on the question that Joseph asked about the proactive justice. Now, what I want to ask is that to base the proactive justice in comparison with African reparation fees, like South Africa is asking for reparation fees, like Nigeria are preparing their own as well, will there be justice in giving a proactive justice instead of the Africa preparing reparation presenting it to the European colonizer? Is there any proactive way or step they can take to look into that reparation to all Africa countries to do justice in this aspect? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And George, could you repeat it for me? Because it was a little bit muffled, so I couldn't really hear. Could you just repeat?
My question is that, okay.
Or make it simple with the words a little farther apart so I can hear better.
All right.
If you please.
Okay. All right. Africa is asking for a reparation fee from the Europeans that colonized them. So instead of Africa asking this, is there any proactive step of justice that the European can take to look into the reparation, to make the reparation paid as a part of proactive justice, instead of Africa asking the European that colonized them about the reparation fees?
I think you're talking about Ethiopia. Is that correct? Talking on the state level and the continental level. Is that correct?
Yes, he's actually asking about reparations that should be, done by European and colonizers to Africa, whether South Africa, Nigeria, etc.
Oh God, it's such a hard reparations. In the United States, there's a lot of demands, and in Canada for reparations, and the conflicts are over, But And I know for the Holocaust, there were some reparations given to Jews whose all their, homes, factories, etc., were taken, but it was extremely bureaucratic. And the German government was giving reparations, but one of my colleagues was a lawyer working on this, and they would just drag it out till the people were dead. So I'm worried about the problem of reparations as becoming a bureaucratic blob that doesn't work. And so I'm more in favor of making things work now. People right now are suffering, and how can we straighten that out? Africa, like Colombia, is a victim of resources and extraction, and I think we have hardly any handle on justice and on these levels between states, transnational corporations, and past wrongs. And by the way, I just want to say that the World Trade Organization also has a tribunal. And this tribunal is supposed to settle disputes. But the World Trade Organization can bring cases to court where they sue nations, they sue governments for blocking the work of corporations. You see, we have a lot of work to do that doesn't even come into the discussion of justice. And if any of you are interested in forming a talking group thinking about this, I have so much to learn myself. I think we have to learn from each other what's happening in different countries. So you have, well, I don't know, you can look at the case, for example, the case in, you hear the truck on my street? You could look at the case in Canada where the Indigenous First Peoples, I think, are getting reparations, and some of the acts are in the past, so there's no statute of limitations. They can't say, well, that happened a long time ago, we don't cover that anymore. I think this model that you're describing has to be invented. And also people in the United States are working on that for slavery, but I don't know how far they've gotten. So I think your topic is extremely important and needs to be developed much, much, much more. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much, Janet, for answering all these questions so superbly. And it's about, we've got about 4 minutes, and I would like to ask you to talk a little bit about your book and, well, the possibility of a discount.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, so I spent many years working on this book, Reclaimative Post-Conflict Justice. Actually, that kind of post-conflict justice was formulated after studying alternative people's tribunals and describing what the World Tribunal on Iraq did that was unique and very social justice oriented. And it's co-authored with Dale Snowert and with a preface by Betty Reardon. And it has a kind of monograph in there on tribunals and alternative tribunals and how to think about them, and how this was organized and many of the issues that were brought up. For example, they figured out that crimes are crimes against the state. And if there's no law in the state, then it's just a violation and you can't prosecute. You can't prosecute George Bush for invading Iraq because where was the law against invasion? There was no law. Now there is in the International Criminal Court. But okay, so these are the kinds of things, that's a very minor detail that I wanted to point out to you. But okay, so there's this, and let me see. So it's published by Cambridge Scholars Press, and I should put this in the chat. If you go to their website and you type in, let me see. Oops. One second. Okay. If you type in you can get a 40% discount. And it's at okay, there it is. Thank you, George. Maybe you could photograph it, with your camera or something.
Right. Thank you so much, Janet, for this inspiring talk. Thank you so much for your time and dedication. And I would like to thank everybody also for joining us. Some have joined us for the first time. And please, we welcome you and everybody next week, next Wednesday. We'll be listening to another teacher, Professor Daniela Herrera from Italy, on teaching peace by using simulations. So thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you, George. Thank you, friends and new people. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. See you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you.
Hi. Hello.
Bye-bye.
Yes, my internet was